Peter James, your new novel, Dead Man's Time, is all about antiques and set in the antiques underworld. Can you tell us what prompted you to write about that subject?
Yeah, I grew up in Brighton, and the antiques world has always been the beating heart of Brighton's villainy. Brighton is the home to a particularly iniquitous crime and kind of criminal known as the knocker boy. And these were, when I grew up as a kid, if anybody got burgled, the police would say to them, go down to the lanes. You got a good chance of finding your stuff there. And in fact, my ex-wife and I were burgled in 1980, and sure enough, we found some of her jewelry in a jewelry shop in the lanes. I talked to I go out with the police a lot, and I met the former head of the antique squad in Brighton. And through him, I was introduced to a number of former, what they call knocker boys, and these were ex-rag and bone men. And they would go, one of them told me how, they all operated in slightly different ways, but one told me his method of operation was they'd knock on the door of a house, select a house with an elderly, ideally an elderly widow. They say, oh madam, we're just in your area, we're turning bits of unwanted furniture into cash. You've got anything in your house you might like to get rid of? And if she was unwise enough to let them in, and she would let them in because they'd always be charming, they'd go in and they'd look at they'd find something that was complete grot. They say, oh madam, that's really valuable. I haven't seen one of them in a long time, Mark. You got that well insured. She said, blimey, what else have I got? And they said, would you like us to look at a few other things? Yes, please. Then they look around and find maybe the one good thing she had in the house. And one of them would distract her, the other would kneel down. From his back pocket, he'd produce a bag of sawdust. He'd pour it underneath. That's got woodworm. I don't want that in the house. Take it off your hands for a fiver if you like. She said, well, thank you very much. And that was how they operated. It got so bad that by the mid-80s, police forces in every city and town in England, if they saw a car, a station wagon or a van with a Brighton registration plate, they would stop it. And if the driver was in the antiques trade, they'd say, op it.
You mentioned that you've spoken to knocker boys in the past. I mean, obviously your links with the police and Sussex police are very well known, and that's where your authenticity for your police characters come from. But do you know a few criminals then? Do you speak to them?
A lot. Dead Man's Time centres around a burglary in a large Brighton house. And I wanted to talk to professional housebreakers. And I've contacted the governor of Lewes Prison, which is our local big prison. And I said, do you have any career housebreakers? And he said, yeah, we got a few. And he arranged, and I actually met two of them. And it's kind of interesting. One of them has been, I asked him his life story. He's a sort of gangly bloke. He says, what would you like to know? I said, how did you start? He said, well, I started, he said, I grew up in Moulsecoombe, which is one of the kind of big housing estates on the outskirts of Brighton. He said, I did my first house. It was a neighbour at 15, got 2 years in an approved school. He said, I realised when I came out, he said, you're going to get the same amount of time whether you do a poor house or a posh house. So I decided to concentrate on posh houses. And he said, what you have to do is you always leave a back door open or a patio door window. And he said, my problem was, he said, I'm not actually very good, I do get caught a lot. He said, on the first house is what I did. He said, this big house in Dark Road Avenue, and he said, 10 o'clock at night, the owners came back. It was November, dark. He said, I laid it out the patio doors. I didn't realise they had a swimming pool, did I? And then I talked to another guy who was kind of much savvier than this guy, about 35, and he was a professional car thief. He worked for an Indian gang in London where they would actually taser drivers of sports cars, drag them out. And he said, it's got harder to steal cars now because of all the security. He said, it took me 4 hours to nick an Audi today. He said, it's easy to break in the house and nick the keys. He said, well, if you're in the house, then you might as well take other stuff as well.
Do you have any ideas for your next novel? Have you started working on it?
Yeah, I started working on it. It's due in 2 weeks' time. There's just a mere 30,000 words separating me from the last line right now.
And are we allowed to know roughly the subject?
Yeah, it's called Want You Dead. It'll be the 10th Foy Grace novel coming out in June next year. And it's the theme of it is a 30-year-old woman who's gone on an online dating agency, and she's met this guy, and her advert says, I need somebody to rekindle my fire. And she meets this guy, and he's given a completely false background about himself, which slowly comes out, and she discovers that he actually has a history of violence, and when she dumps him, he goes absolutely bananas, and he kind of replays that line of "light my fire" by basically setting fire to everything she knows and loves.